Okay, we're just about there time-wise. So let's at least begin with our hellos and so on and so forth. It's really great to have you here. Um, we decided to have two webinars this month because so many things are happening and people are eager to figure some things out. And delegation is one of those. In fact, this topic was suggested by a participant, a frequent participant on these webinars, and so yeah, so hence the topic today. And at a distance, it's also a bit different. So Nigel and I are going to try and make that as pertinent as possible to what's happening now. And talking which, welcome Nigel, who's going to be working with me today on this one, co-presenting it. And also later we're going to be joined by Kevin. Now I've known Kevin Smith for many years, and many years in fact, it turns out. We were talking yesterday, and he's going to bring sort of that reality check, because what we're trying to do with these webinars, although it's very much one way, because that's a sort of slight limitation of the medium, we do try and introduce people who are actually out there doing this stuff, running companies. And Kevin, certainly that's what he's doing at the moment. Many years in the city, and so he's seen a whole load of different things, and I thought he would be brilliant to have on the webinar today to give a live, this is what's happening out on the ground perspective. The aim, as always, is to promote thought, is to promote awareness, but above all, the most exciting thing is if we could entice you to experiment with doing something different as a result of what you've heard and seen this morning. That would be really top of the tree of wants for us. So today we're going to really concentrate on the psychology of delegation, not all the checklists and all the sort of due diligence that you would normally do at the beginning of a piece of delegation. So we're really going to go much more to the hearts and minds bit, your heart and mind as a delegator, and the other person's as the person you've chosen, the delegee. Horrible word. We're not going to use it again. Have I missed anything, Nigel?
Sounds like a lot to me.
Great. So so initially, just 15 seconds from me, what is delegation? Well, in essence, it's a string of conversations. It's a string of conversations that get something done by someone else other than you. And that's it, pure and simple. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. So I'm going to switch my camera off, and you too, Nigel, and then well, you're on next, aren't you?
Yeah, okay. Camera off here, do you reckon, Paul?
Yeah, I reckon so.
So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about why do delegation in the first place. And I think we'll probably be preaching to the converted here, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, Paul's going to bring up a graphic for me shortly. First opportunity is almost a cliche these days. Delegation can be a growth opportunity, but it's a shame really that it's such a cliche, because delegation really can be an opportunity for people to learn. And poor old Chippy here is been delegated the role of doing a briefing in front of number 10 Downing Street. But delegation done well for the individual can also bring them stimulation to the role, as well as this learning opportunity. And the other positive effect on them is that sense that they are being trusted with something, and trusted by their manager. In a practical sense, there are, we think, three other ways in which delegation is effective, and why we all at heart know we should be doing it, or doing it more often. One is leveraging the talent that you have in your team, using the best people for the job, the right skills at the right time, and adding to the versatility within the team as well. Simply getting things done quicker, speeding up progress, getting things done better, partly because you're using the right people at the right time, and partly because you're not doing anything yourself. And finally, delegation allows you to spread the risk. So if that mythical bus was to come along and you were to fall under it, you're not the only one who knows how to do things, because you've been delegating all along. And in these days with the not so mythical COVID-19, there's obviously very real possibilities that more people that you have in your team that are able to do a bit of what everyone else does, the more resilience you'll have in the team. But I want to move on to why we often don't delegate, the things that get in the way, the things that perhaps stop us delegating in the first place or doing it effectively. And these reasons are the ones that are arguably more compelling for people, because knowing how to do delegation is reasonably straightforward. It's getting past these barriers that's important. And I'm going to put up a poll for you on the screen. I'd be interested to see which ones of these resonate with you. So first one is, we're going to have them all up at the same time, or one by one. First one is that it's quicker to do it myself. Often people think that the task of delegating, because it involves a conversation, might be quicker to just get in on and do it rather than waste that time sitting someone down. Second one, not wanting to overburden people, either perhaps worried that they are already busy, or certainly again in this current climate, being concerned that people are already feeling pressure somehow and not wanting to dump things on them. There's a fear about not wanting to risk your own reputation. What if they do mess things up? What if something goes awry and you have to pick up the pieces? How might that reflect on you? Links us into the next one. Only I can do it well enough. So maybe you don't care about your reputation, but you think you're the one who's best placed to do any of this stuff, and anything else wouldn't be up to par. Finally, I like doing practical things. I don't want to lose all that. So managers often find that the role that they joined an organization to do, certainly if they've hung around for a number of years, is perhaps not what they're doing at all anymore. Their job has become about dealing with people rather than dealing with nuts and bolts. So there can be a temptation to get involved with the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day jobs rather than delegating. So vote for which one of these you think holds you back from delegating. And then I'm going to hand over to Paul, and he's going to take us through a bit of a debrief of the group's results. And I covered everything, Paul. Anything
Yeah,
you'd
I think
like?
so. Yeah, I'm just watching the voting come in. So 58%, 62% of you have voted so far, and there is a pretty clear winner so far. A few more of you to vote yet. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds, and then I'm also going to invite Kevin in about 10 seconds, because I'd really like to get his take for the first time today of you know, are these familiar themes to him and the people he's worked with, but also I'm going to ask him what his one is as well. So let's do you want to press the button, or shall I, Nicola, to submit? There we go. You did. So there are the results. The quicker to do it myself, a clear favorite there, as you can see, and some way back, not wanting to overburden. So there is something about speed here by the sound of it. But let's get Kevin in on this one, and hear what you're thinking and where you are on this. I'm also going to turn my camera on for now. How are we doing? Kevin, are you there?
I'm here, Paul. I can't see anyone, but I'm here.
Excellent. So I can't see myself. That's really weird. There we go. If you can see me, that's fine. So what?
Can't see you at the moment, Paul.
Oh, that's weird, isn't it? My camera's doing something weird. Okay. Well, there we go. He's finally appeared. So yes. Does that one? I'm looking at that because that's where that screen is. So does that ring a bell? That one? Quicker to do it myself.
Undoubtedly, it made me smile when Nigel started running through the options there, because they're all classics that I've fallen into over the years and still do.
Now you run your own business, so you're in a very different position to when you and I first met. What have you noticed is different? I mean, is there more of a right? Because you know, obviously you're the boss, and when you start any business, you do have to do everything, and you were used to much more of a big company thing with the bank.
Yeah, yeah. So with the bank had systems and departments in place to do everything else other than the main focus of what my job activity was. Whereas now, my job activity is running the company as well as trying to carry out the principal company activity.
So even more tempting now to do it all yourself.
Without a doubt, yes, because I know how to do it best.
You're employee number one. So, what about the other ones? The not wanting to overburden. Was that something that ever taxed you?
I think, yeah, throughout my career, I've always worked in an environment where, you know, resource, i.e. other people, were always in scarce demand. You know, you only ever got them when things were exceptionally busy, so that, in other words, they were always fully occupied. So going to give them another task, you did sometimes feel like, well, I know they're already busy, and now I'm asking them to do something else that is maybe outside their day-to-day activity. You know, how are they going to react to it?
And what? How did you explain it away to yourself that it was actually an okay thing to do to make them even busier, even though you were mostly just going out to lunch schmoozing clients?
For our discussion yesterday, yes. You hit it on the head about why delegate earlier. The principal reason I would delegate tasks out was developments, to enable those who work for me to develop additional skills, and perhaps also as a way of demonstration that I did trust them to do more senior tasks than they were currently carrying out for me.
And now you have your own workforce, and um, how what's that like? Because a lot, you know, you've been going a few years now, but early doors you don't really know what they're like. And one of the excuses that comes up, I say excuses, I suppose rationales, is they're too new to do it. um and you know, and maybe they're too new to do it. Will they know how to do it? But also there's something about giving away all the fun stuff, even though there's somebody who might be better at it than you. What, how have you done that?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it the fun stuff. It might fall into the stuff that I need to know and I need to keep close to. And if I give it away, someone else suddenly becomes the fount of all knowledge of that particular topic. That can be slightly unnerving. But it's very much, you know, as I grew the company, I needed to delegate some tasks because I didn't frankly have time, and in other parts, going back to the self-development piece, to keep that person kind of in the loop on board. And it all seemed like a good idea, but I have also, you know, when an employee left, I then discovered that unfortunately allowing them to do payroll wasn't the wisest thing in the world I'd done. It cost me a couple of £1,000.
Okay, so you do not delegate lightly. You have learnt the hard way, and yet, you know, and that came out of your pocket, really, your company's pocket. That's a harsh lesson
Yes.
in delegation. But and yet, it sounds like you're still a believer.
Without a doubt. You know, for me, it is bringing people on. You know, my ultimate aim is to be out on the golf course 4 days a week, perhaps.
Why not? And you can now.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to bring you back a little bit later on, but thanks for kind of giving me that reality check. That's really helpful. So great. So where are we? The psychological mechanics. I want to get onto that. I need to find the buttons for my screens, and here we go. So what we want to do now is go into the what we're actually about in delegating. What's happening in people's hearts and minds. And the first bit, the task. So this is the quick bit, really. whereby we're really, hang on a second, there we go. I just need to find my correct screen. There we are. Bang. So the task, that's often the easy bit. And that's, I want you to do this by, a certain point in a certain place to a certain standard. Okay, that's the easy bit. But actually, there is something rather more important than that to consider. And as far as we're concerned, we think that actually thinking about what's going on in your hearts and minds, in the other person's hearts and mind, is even more important almost than trying to figure out the perfectly packaged task. So I'm just going to chuck my camera off here as well while I'm at it. The first thing that I suggest that people consider in the person is want. Does the person actually want to do it? And I think that's the most important thing. Do they have the attitude? Do they have the keenness, the determination to want to get stuck in? So that's the first thing for me. The second thing is, do they, and this, I think this is attitude trumps this, and I'm doing this in order of priority, but do they actually have the, not so much the time, but the capacity? Do they actually have enough left in the tank to do it? So they might be very determined, but we've got to judge, I think, if we've had favorites in delegation, if we've tended to always trust the same person because she always delivers. I then place experience. Some people might be tempted to delegate to experience. And again, what that tends to lead to is overburdening the same people again and again. And finally, and this is probably the most disconcerting thing to do, is to actually put knowledge last, or at least the intellectual, the theoretical knowledge. I think that knowing your stuff is really important, of course. But as Kevin was just saying, giving people a break, giving people the opportunity to test themselves out, to try new things, if they've got the attitude and they've got some capacity and they've got experiences of going to new places, and that's the experience thing, not have they done this before, this particular thing, but are they adaptable? Have they traveled? Have they shown that they can do lots of different things in different circumstances? And so the knowledge comes last, and that's the thing that you get to accumulate by having these different experiences. So that's the order that I put it in. In fact, Nigel, you and I somewhat tangled on this, didn't we? You took a bit of persuading.
Yes, I did. I guess I was looking for the exceptions and picking up on something you were saying a moment ago. That I was thinking about those times where it might be easy to just delegate to those people who have the right attitude, if that's the priority, and always delegate to them, perhaps not making yourself consider those people who perhaps aren't up for it, but for the sake of fairness and one of the advantages we were talking about earlier, versatility in the team and spreading the risk, it might actually be worth looking at one of those other factors.
Yeah, and we're going to come on to what this business of coming across resistance, because that's really important, isn't it? And in fact, I'm gonna talk about that next. I don't know how many. There must be some of you in the room. There are enough of us here today. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done some parachuting. Mine was a long time ago, back in the army. And one of the things that struck me, and I didn't do it to any great degree, but one of the things that stayed with me ever since then, quite apart from the sheer terror of throwing yourself out of an aeroplane, is actually wondering whether your parachute will open. And the thing that we were taught and was drilled into us on the ground was that you have to be happy with the parachute. And this is the same as when you're delegating. At the point of delegation, one of the things that I really look out for, and I suggest you consider doing this, is to make sure that the person is 100% on board and that you are 100% on board. In parachuting terms, that you're taught as soon as you've left the plane and you're under canopy, as soon as it's cracked and suddenly broken your fall, you look up to have a look at the shape of the parachute. And the way we were taught to look at things was it's either 100% circular or 100% right, or it's 100% wrong. If there's a kink on it, if it's not quite right, it's wrong. And you cut it away and you deploy your reserve chute. And it's the same with delegation, we think. What we do when we find that somebody is hesitating is it's time to get the empathy out. It's time to try and pay attention despite our eagerness to shift the task or to use the person. It's time to really examine or help them to be honest about what's on their minds. Now, if you've joined our webinars before, you'll know exactly what I'm going to write up here, but I will do that now for the sake of completeness. The first thing that we need to think about, first and foremost, is how they feel. Oops, a very thick pen here. Bear with me while I quickly make an adjustment to the size of the marker pen. There we are. Oh, gone too far the other way now. There we go. Oh, there we are. So this is about how they feel. I'm making a bit of a mess of this. Wait one while I get things together here. Okay. My computer's not quite keeping up. There we go. How they feel about the possibility of doing the task. What are you hearing in their voice? What are you seeing in their faces that makes you think, they don't sound on board? And it might be if somebody is worried about that they can't do it, then that'll be one set of feelings. It might be hesitation. It might be worry about making a mistake. The second thing is what that feeling is about. If you can figure it out, why that person is having that thing. We're going to give a couple of examples in a minute. But this noticing and then saying, reflecting back to the person what you're noticing. Now, obviously, it's a lot trickier at the moment because you're having to read people through perhaps a rather substandard webcam with their head that's backlit. So you might have to pay very close attention to their voice. So all in all, what you're trying to pick out is, where's that hesitation coming from? What's that about? And give them the opportunity to be absolutely transparent about it. Because what you don't want is nasty surprises later on down the line where they reveal the very reservations that's actually causing them to begin to fail, for want of a better expression. So that's the listening with empathy piece. I think you're next, I believe, Nigel. I'm just going to.
Yeah, well, there's a link between what you were just saying and the next bit, which is the follow-up, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. But one of the things that can make doing a follow-up tricky is not having said when you're going to follow up. So before you finish that piece of delegation, you need to check in with the other person. How do you actually want to do this? How are we going to keep in touch? How are you going to keep me apprised of progress? And when is it going to be okay for me to check in with you? Once you've agreed that with them and bought permission to have that follow-up, which, at a risk of slight aside here, is arguably even more important to do these days than normal times, because we're missing out on all those water cooler moments, the opportunities to bump into each other around the office, to casually check in with how things are going. So we think that it's even more important to plan that follow-up and make it really clear as to when you're going to have a follow-up conversation. So the follow-up itself is what I'd like to talk about next. The screen's going a bit funny. But we've got a nice visual here, or shall I switch to camera?
No, it's all right. You're okay. Here we go.
So even if you have agreed a follow-up date with the other person, one of the things that most people find tricky is doing it because you don't want to hassle them. Many of us will have had micromanagers in the past, and when you become a manager yourself, you don't want to be perceived that way by seen as one as just checking up on them or patronizing them. But on the other hand, you obviously do need to check that things are getting done. You need that reassurance, let alone following up in the way that you said you would. So it's worth noting that even with your agreement that you're going to follow up a week on Friday, for example, that when you do check in with them, be it dialing in, logging in, whatever it might be these days, a phrase that we suggest you using in your own words, but is to ask, is this still a good time to check in? Say if it's not for some reason. What you're actually doing here is inviting some honesty from them, giving them permission to say if there's something going on for them right now, to be upfront if A, it's not a good time, or B, there's some sort of obstacle that they've hit in regard to the task, and so that's why now wouldn't be a good time to do the follow-up. But what you've actually done is started the follow-up conversation. You're inviting honesty from them to start telling you about what's going on. At this point, I'd like to bring Kevin back in, so I'm going to switch to video. While I'm doing that, anything you would add, Paul?
Yeah, I think yes. I think you've got it covered, actually. No, answer no, because this the beginning of the follow-up conversation, that's I think when people seem to feel nervous. How do I start? What comes out of my mouth first? How's it going? Sounds a bit mealy-mouthed, or where have you got to? Or that sounds a bit more pointed. But actually, is this a good time? And going from there is a nice way of easing into the conversation, where actually you do want their honesty and their first reaction. So yeah, that's why this or similar phrases is are good. So I'll leave you to talk for a second.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. So hello again, Kevin. So how would you start off this sort of conversation where you're following up on a task that you've delegated?
I suppose it depends who I delegated the task to. So if it were direct reports, for instance, I'd probably be having regular meetings with them anyway, and it would form part of a structured agenda. If it were someone who wasn't a normal reportee, in the days when we were all in offices and wandering past each other, yet the casual drop in past the desk, how's it going, chat, oh, how are you getting on with so and so? That would be my typical approach. And that's when you get to judge, is someone doing it, or has it turned into a bottom drawer job?
So it sounds like two quite different approaches. The first scenario you mentioned was quite straightforward, because the meeting you were having face to face back in the day, it was clear that that's what you're going to be talking about, catching up on stuff that's been delegated. Your other version sounded much more casual, almost roundabout, like having a happen chance conversation with them out of which talking about delegated tasks would fall.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of second type of task delegation would be quite often when I was delegating for a skill set. So if I had someone with a particular skill set, bias, interest, perhaps, delegate something to them that I needed to have done or would be beneficial overall to my business or team, I might delegate that to them rather than the direct reportee, albeit I probably would have discussed it with the direct reportee as well.
So I'm interested to hear what sort of words you use. Hello again, Paul. Is there?
I've got a question too. Yeah.
Do you want to chip in with that at this point?
Well, I want to know, Kevin, what did you do when you thought that it had become a bottom drawer task, that the person had kind of tried to distance themselves? How did you handle that? Because I can imagine, knowing you a little bit now, probably not best pleased, but you obviously didn't want to get annoyed with them.
Maybe not in the first instance. Is probably the fairest way of putting that. So I knew most of my team very well. You know, when I was working with the 40s, I knew everyone pretty well within the team, and therefore I could generally have quite a good conversation either by their desk or, you know, whilst making a cup of coffee, etc., etc. And you could eke that out of them and find out, were they doing it? If it had turned to a bottom drawer task, why it was a bottom drawer task at the moment? Was it overburdening? You know, was there too much else on? Given the opportunity to be fair, you know, if they didn't see it as an opportunity to hand it back. But again, it all depends how time critical these tasks are, how time critical that delegation process is. If someone told me yes, no, I will get it done. You know, I know I really want to do this. I want to prove myself, and they then let me down, say a second time. That's when I kind of have a sense of humour failure.
Got it. And yeah, so you picked up on the little bits and pieces, and as Nigel put it earlier, you're quite sort of subtle about it. You kind of worked it into the conversation. You probably still do now.
Yes, I mean, if you're delegating out tasks, particularly for development purposes, you want to do it on an encouraging basis. You don't want to do it as if you're waving a big stick or the sword of Damocles above their head. Thou shalt get this done or you're out. That's not really like how I like working, unless I have, I suppose, a problem with someone.
Yeah, but they have to have kind of said yes a few times and still not done it, and that's what would get your gander up. Kevin would have a sense of human failure at that point.
Precisely.
Yeah. And on that, sorry to hog this, Nigel, but I'm interested, given the circumstances we're in now, giving feedback or having a sense of humor failure, what position do you think leaders are in now? Because weeks ago, everybody was being terribly grateful of their employees for just even managing to pull it off, you know, rigging up their computer and switching it on in the morning and handling being in very strange circumstances. These strange circumstances aren't so strange anymore. What latitude do you give yourself now in these circumstances to be as exacting as you were pre-lockdown?
Actually, I'll be honest with you, Paul, that's quite a difficult question to answer, because next door I've got an office with my office team all sitting in it working. Because of what I do, we're all key workers. We do actually need to be in, and we've been in right the way through, you know, this crisis. So I'm not delegating from a distance.
No, but I guess there's still so easier in one sense and easier to follow up. But I guess there's still everybody's trying terribly hard, and I am asking them to, or they are opting to risk their necks. They are key workers. They are, you know, helping others. They are carers. So have you taken your foot off the gas at all in terms of your expectations?
I am probably a lot more lenient than I have been in terms of things not getting done, things, as long as the mission critical core tasks, i.e. the safety of my team and the safety of my clients is being carried out, I'm a happy man. everything else that spills off that is you know, a nice to for the time being. Yes, I mean, I've only had one critical task, I suppose, coming during this period that I did have to have a little bit of a nag at twice to my sort of number two, to look, yeah, we've got other people to do these other things that you do enjoy fiddling with. Please get on with this important return and have it done by Friday.
Was it Thursday evening?
I was a little better than that. I think it was Tuesday afternoon.
Kevin, thank you so much again for the reality check. And interesting that the job and your company is one of the ones which is continuing to operate. But even so, and you see each other, but even so, you've had to make some adjustments, even though it's almost business as usual for you. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Fantastic. Where are we, Nigel? We're on to do's. You're on again, aren't you? I'm gonna switch my camera off and try and take better charge of the screens.
Go for it. So we're going to do some do's now. There are two main do's in regard to delegation that we've identified. The first one is around making sure that the individual is actually on board, which comes back to Paul's mention of attitude earlier. Empathizing will reveal why they're resisting, if they're resisting. For example, they may be overloaded, telling you they're overloaded, in which case you might say something along the lines of, you sound worried about taking on more, or worried about taking on this new task. Also, that people might have a lack of confidence. It may be a general lack of confidence in themselves, or a lack of confidence in being able to do this particular task. So you may empathize, sounding something like, you sound worried that you might not get things 100% right. Allowing them to express their worry, and if you need to later in the conversation, give them the reassurance that they need, that you accept that mistakes might happen with stuff that's new to them. Finally, it might be something else that you've not yet been able to identify, but you pick up on a hesitation in their voice. You've delegated something to them, and you ask them if they're up for it, and they're like, yeah. The tone in the voice is the clue. You don't yet know why they're not up for it, but you can empathize along the lines of, you don't sound too keen, giving them the space to tell you more about what's getting in the way for them. So first, do make sure they're on board. Second thing is to sell it to yourself. In other words, to avoid the circle of fear, where you're not quite sure about whether this is the right thing to delegate to the right person in this particular moment. You have some hesitation, which they then pick up on, wondering, why is Paul delegating this thing in this way? He doesn't seem too sure. Is it about me? Is he not sure in my ability to do it right? That uncertainty then being picked up by the manager, Paul, and before you know it, both of you are agreeing that it's not a good idea that this task is delegated at all. So avoid that circle of fear by selling it to yourself in the first place, that delegating this task right now to this person is the appropriate thing to do. Anything you would add to that, Paul? Because I think
I think you've got it absolutely 100% covered there. No, I have nothing to add. We've got to the time, it's just before 10:10, where it's your turn if you want to. If you have something that has been on your mind, or an experience that you've had that you'd like to share, or an insight, or indeed you have a question for us, or indeed for Kevin, then this is the time to do it. We've got a few minutes left, and we're going to keep an eye on the question tab. If you don't know where to ask the question, it's actually in your little control panel under questions, and we're just going to see if there are any questions left over.
Well, one thing while you're looking, Paul, I mean,
Yeah.
cut in if I can't see the question panel at the moment.
Oh, that's all right. So
Pick up on something.
I'll take care of that one.
Cool. So yeah, picking up on something that Kevin said right at the beginning of the session about having that experience where someone had let him down. It made me think that most people, especially when they're new to management, conversations I've had with new managers, can be worried about some of the things that we identified earlier on, worried about whether someone's going to make a mess of a task, whether they're going to do it well enough, whether they're going to do it as well as them. And from what I hear from some people, it can take just one experience with reality to then confirm what was previously an assumption. And people are looking for what they expect to find, and then all of a sudden they're saying, right, that proves it. That one incidence of when someone messed it up proves that forevermore I should just carry on doing stuff myself and never delegate.
Mm-hmm. There's one question that came up was that we haven't yet touched on, actually, was something I tripped over, which was that people are finding it, and this was a leader I was talking to who felt that she had to carry on no matter what. So the organization and her boss had continued to delegate things, and it was kind of business as usual. And everybody was really immensely proud that they'd managed to make all the adaptations and run the businesses from home. But what happened for her, and it's taken her a few weeks to get the hang of it, is that she forgot to start saying no to some of the things, or actually setting more realistic timelines. Because what she was finding was that in taking she was taking on the same amount of work that she would normally, business as usual, back in the building. But because of the way that these sort of interactions were working, it was taking much longer just to have the ordinary conversations. You mentioned earlier this morning about the absence of the water cooler moment. Well, those water cooler moments only take, a minute or two, and Kevin referred to them as well. And Kevin still has the luxury of actually being able to poke his head through the door and say, has anybody heard anything about XYZ? Or, Janet, have you found out about what's name? Whereas now it's a 15-minute slot in somebody's diary, and this person was finding, and others I've spoken to, finding that just to have that tiny little water cooler moment takes about 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah,
before you know it, if you have 5 or 6 of those, you're doing the work in the evening, your day job, as it were.
Yeah, it's really interesting because someone I was speaking to just a week ago was saying very much the same thing, very much a delegation scenario as well. They were delegating less because they were very aware of the pressure that their team was under, working from home and actually not having the luxury of being able to get out much because of their lives, etc. That individual was experiencing a lot of stress. One vent for it could have been to delegate more, but they were holding on to it. And also what was compounding it was exactly this, that whereas they were saying I could just catch up with people here and there when we were sharing office space, but now people out of the blue are blocking half an hour slots with me to check in with me and just to keep things going is eating into my time hugely.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's been replicated across the board. Others of our colleagues, is when we meet amongst ourselves, we're discussing people where the scenarios that are turning up in coaching conversations, or indeed just speaking to clients. So we're almost out of time. We're going to do our little summary now, or at least Nigel is. So I'm going to get. It's over to you. Final thoughts, Nigel.
Final thoughts. First one is say that if you're at all uneasy about delegating, don't let it go. Empathize with the situation. Try and with the individual rather. Empathize and try and get to an understanding of what the obstacle is. Trust your gut if you are getting that sense that they're not quite fully bought in. Second thought, commit. Don't faffle in the doorway, certainly if you're about to jump out of a plane. But it comes back to the circle of fear that we were talking about earlier. Once you decided to delegate something, have confidence that you've made the right decision and do it. And we think you'll find that you avoid all sorts of awkward conversations that delegation can turn into. Finally, remember that it can really help people to stay interested, engaged, and is an opportunity for people to feel trusted by you when you delegate effectively. And like we were saying right at the beginning, it's almost a cliche to talk about these positive effects that delegation can have on the individual, but it really is true. So there we have it, our final thoughts. Remember to empathise, don't faffle at the door, and also remember that delegation is for the other person's benefit for some very real reasons.
Cool, Nigel, thank you very much indeed. I want to thank Nigel for joining me today and putting in all the hard work and taking a lot of the burden off me and generally making things more interesting for you. Kevin, in the same vein, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to hear about your business and the sort of, rather personal and sort of human thoughts that you have as a really experienced leader. And of course, always to Nicola in the background, making everything work at a technical level. And most of all, you for entrusting us with the chunk, a 45-minute chunk of your Friday morning. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll get to see you again on the 26th of June. So we're going to take a bit of a break and we'll see you towards the end of June. We have some topics lined up. I haven't actually chosen which one to go for, but we'll advertise it in plenty of time. If you have something you want to discuss or want to see and hear our take on, then just drop us an email and we'll incorporate your thinking. Thank you so much and take care of yourselves. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.